Where was God at 9:02 a.m.? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Welcome, friends. This is David Schnitker, your host for today's program. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You will find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. It is a great privilege to have Robin Jones on the program today. Robin was a classmate of mine at Moody Bible Institute, where she graduated. She's also a graduate of Biola University. I've asked her to join me on the program today to discuss a book she wrote 25 years ago. It's entitled, Where Was God at 9:02 a.m.? And by the way, this book is available on Amazon. I wanted to mention that before I forgot. It's still available. It's published by Thomas Nelson, but still available on Amazon. And it's a wonderful book. I just finished reading it for the second time after about 25 years. So it's still a gripping book. This book is about the crime of the century, the most deadly terrorist attack on American soil in the 20th century. And of course, what we are talking about is the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. This attack occurred on April 19th, 1995, just a little over 25 years ago. So I've asked Robin to join me on the program today, not just to talk about what happened in our hometown of Oklahoma City 25 years ago, but how that event can help shape our thinking regarding the present crisis that has befallen our nation, that is the Wuhan virus pandemic. So Robin, welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
It's great to have you.
Well, I was going to say it's great to be had, but that doesn't sound good. It's great to be here.
It is. It's wonderful to have you. And it was on April 19th of this year that I saw your text commemorating the 25th anniversary, and you had a picture of your book, and it just got me to thinking that though this event took place 25 years ago, it's still very relevant today because we're going through a national crisis. It's totally unlike the bombing that took place, but in terms of its impact, both in terms of death, sickness, and let's be honest, depression. People are scared. People are depressed. People don't know what's going on or what their future is. Many have lost their jobs. So really, if we magnify the Murrah bombing by like 1 million, I think we can relate to the psyche of many people today. So when I saw your text, I thought, I think a program on the Murrah building bombing could be an encouragement to people today.
Well, it's interesting you say it quite like that, because something that fascinates me in the Christian community, and I know most of your viewers are believers, is that how do I want to say this? In the Bible, and particularly in the Old Testament, but in the Bible, memorials are a significant theme. And in our culture, it kind of comes and goes sometime. But memorials, I love the memorials in the Bible. And you referenced 25 years ago, somebody 24 didn't have the visceral experience that we did. So it is good to remember.
It really is. And I agree. There are many memorials in the Bible that God told people, set up these stones,
right.
To commemorate the crossing of the Red Sea. Other memorials, of course, there's so many of the ceremonies in the Old Testament were memorials of God's actions. The Passover, it's a yearly memorial. So I think it's good to memorialize the past, particularly as it relates to God's interventions.
Yes, to remember.
Right.
I mean, it just cracks me up that how many months were the Israelites away from Egypt, and they forgot? Not very long.
Right, like 6 weeks.
Yes. So we do need to remember. And even though it was 25 years ago, and people, our age and younger may have trouble remembering, but just think there's a lot of adults that are 25 and younger that did not have the experience. So, yeah, it was an incredible time.
It was. And I know that we are mutual friends of a couple that died in the Social Security office. Good Christian people. Maybe you know more, but I know these two wonderful people. We used to sing in the choir together, and they went home to be with the Lord that morning.
Well, and so just a little context of how the book sort of got started. At the time, I was the manager of a Christian radio station, and well, I'll say that story in a minute. I was a manager of a Christian radio station, and the bombing happened. And just to show how long ago this was, it was before the internet was prevalent.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the internet was there, but
Right.
this is the example of why I know it wasn't prevalent.
That's the dark ages.
Yeah, woo. Yeah, dinosaurs were my
Roamed
pet.
the earth,
yeah.
yes.
And so the reason I remember that so vividly, because I think I had a computer and, it was online, but the media outlets around the world had no way of finding out who locally for them to help communicate around the world the story. And so at that time I became the Irish radio correspondent, and they had no idea I was with a Christian radio
didn't know
station.
you were Irish.
I wasn't. Is the way these international sources found anybody was just going through paper directories. So anyway,
Wow.
I was the manager of a Christian radio station, and of course this was covered around the world. And in my personal opinion, it was one of the few times that the secular media, went out of its way to be respectful of religion because, and as we know it, as of Christian faith, and they were really trying to be, because it was so prevalent in everything. And so the secular media was very respectful, but almost every story and every interview I'd see or hear, I'd think, they don't get it. They're trying to be respectful, but they don't get the faith component of the culture of what our city is. And it's not like everybody in Oklahoma City is a Christian, but the culture of who we are is very permeated with Christian values.
Right.
So that was sort of the trigger to think, we're hearing all these stories and we get it. So we put together a book, and you referenced, of course, my name's on the cover, but it was a team, and it was a team of us collecting stories. And you might know the author Henry Blackaby, and I mean, one of his probably most quoted phrases is, if you want to know what God's will is, you find out where he's acting and you go join him. Well, this was happening. This was like, this opportunity to write this book was like a runaway train, and we were all just running behind it with the opportunity. So it was definitely
So it wasn't
God.
something you sought out. It sought you out.
Well,
and you happened to be in the place
Right,
where the stories were coming.
right at the right time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And you referenced, well, we both referenced memorials, and I do want to reference that, many people who are listening to this program have been to probably memorials around the world, as have I, and so many memorials just don't speak to what the story is. And I think in Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial, the design of it is incredible. And it's really a good place to maybe start talking about the book too, because if you haven't been, it's a city block, and one end of the city block has a gate of time called 902, and the other end of the city block has the gate 903, and then there's a reflecting pool in between, and that's kind of when time stood still. It's just very...
With 168 empty chairs.
Yeah, it's just very
haunting.
Powerful.
It really is. We're
Yeah.
going to be posting a picture of probably several pictures of the memorial with the podcast, so that folks who don't live in Oklahoma City can see this is a very unique memorial.
Yeah, and it communicates the story. So
yeah, it really does. Well, let's back up and to the story, for those who are not native of Oklahoma City, we have folks on our email list that live in other countries. What happened at 9:02 a.m. on April 19th, 1995 in downtown Oklahoma City?
I'd like to kind of even go a little earlier. That morning, once a year in Oklahoma City, the city leaders all come together and have what at that time was called a mayor's prayer breakfast. They do that once a year. And so on April 19th, 1995, at a ridiculous hour, like 6:30, a breakfast was happening, and Oklahoma City was being prayed over by the leaders of the city. Now think about that. Just once a year that happens.
Wow.
And it happened on April 19th, 1995.
And where did that happen?
It was called the Cox Center, which is the convention center.
Downtown.
Yeah. And so so it's just interesting that this story, the story now, it really, we need to think of it as being bookend and permeated with prayer. So that's how, and I was at that, and about 30 minutes after that concluded at 9:02, of course, a bomb was placed by Timothy McVeigh and destroyed the Alfred P. Murrah building and 168 lives. Well, more than 168 lives because of all the people affected, but 168 died. So that's what happened.
Okay.
And it's just interesting to know that on that day, it was a Wednesday. And for me, that makes it kind of a more ordinary day. It wasn't a Monday, it wasn't a Friday.
The hump day,
it was just kind
day.
of an ordinary day. And whether you're in the United States or some other country, there's a lot of international stories that we could reference, but let's take a domestic one and saying it's like, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Where were you when the Challenger blew up? We all kind of, I remember exactly where I was. That is the same with where were you, especially if you're an American citizen, where were you when Oklahoma City was bombed? And so out of all those questions, as we were putting together the book, the bigger question came out was, where was God? And so that's kind of how the book got started, evolved, and in the title. So where was God? And just a little side note, I used this a lot, and I made my license tag similar to this. And it's kind of like when Christians hear that story, where was God? They think, I know where God was. But when people who aren't people of faith hear that story, they think, where the hell was God?
Yeah, where was he? Was he sleeping?
The
How could he allow this to happen?
response to that title was extreme
kind
on both
diverse.
sides.
Yeah, to some it probably engendered anger, hatred. If that's the kind of God that we have, I'm not going to be devoted to him.
Right.
And then other people look through the eyes of faith and say, God was right there.
Right.
And your book really is devoted to answering the question, where was God? That he was there.
You're right.
In so many different ways and in so many different stories.
Yeah, and I also want to say, maybe answering the question, I'd feel a little more comfortable with, brings perspective to the question, because sometimes it's really hard to answer these big questions.
Right.
And we answer it
with short sentences.
Right.
There's a little more to the issue of suffering and evil than just a short answer.
Right. And, as I think of where was God, one of the best ways to tell where God was would be through a story. And the book, Where Was God at 9:02 a.m., have all kinds of stories. But probably, and I almost feel uncomfortable saying one of my favorite because it involves people dying, but one of the most powerful, let me just say it like that, one of the most powerful is the one, and since you've just reread it, you hopefully know this, was a Secret Service agent. Oklahoma City has a Secret Service office here. And Mickey Maroney was a Secret Service agent. And he had a friend, Don, who was also an agent. And Mickey had kind of a wild life, but yet at this point in his life was very committed to to faith and to God and Jesus. In fact, some people maybe thought a little too committed, that he was very enthusiastic about his faith.
Kind of a holy roller, huh?
Well, I'm not saying that.
Thumper.
I'm not saying that, but he was very committed. And so his good friend Don, who was not a person of faith at that time, Don was on Mickey's heart. And so over the years, Mickey and his wife and Don's wife had prayed for Don's salvation, and it just hadn't happened. So that's the two characters, Mickey and Don, both Secret Service agents. Well, on that particular day, Mickey was supposed to be in Tulsa, and Don was supposed to be at the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. And because Don, I think it was he wanted to play in a golf tournament or something, he asked Mickey to switch assignments with him. So Don was in Tulsa on April 19th, 1995, and Mickey was in the Murrah building. And Mickey died. And it was a very significant. He had a very significant influence footprint. It was very difficult, as everybody has really touches so many people. But so Mickey died, and what's interesting about that is Mickey on April 19th entered into the kingdom of God, literally, and shortly thereafter, Don, as a direct result of his friend taking his place. Does that not sound like a familiar theme?
Yes, indeed.
Though unintentional, Don also entered the kingdom of God while still alive on this earth. So Mickey's life was given up, and Don became a believer from that.
In effect, as a sacrifice.
Yes, exactly.
And that so touched Don, his friend, that he came to faith in Christ.
Yeah, so that's one of the more, all of the stories are powerful. In fact, I consider that an extraordinary story. So there's also an ordinary story, and that was a woman named Tilly Westbury, who was married to her husband like 36 years, and every day that he left for work, she would kiss him goodbye and say, "I love you." And this is very ordinary, and that day was the last day she had the opportunity to kiss her husband goodbye. And so many lessons there, and so simple. And as we would talk about this book around different opportunities in the 1990s, I mean, is the question that I ask myself, and I want to ask the audience as well as here, if you were going to die today and had only one phone call you could make, who would you call and what would you say, and why are you waiting? So that's the lesson that Tilly came away with. I mean, we hear that all the time, like a Hallmark card or something, but it's pretty powerful in an ordinary way that can be applied to us now. So those
because
are two of my
honest, Robin,
stories.
We don't know if this will be our day.
Oh, I know.
We just don't. But we assume that we've got 20, 30 years, whatever that's, whatever
maybe
our
not
age
you.
is.
Maybe not you so much.
Yes, right. But I mean, younger people. I'm on my last legs. But younger people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think, I've got a lifetime to make things right with my dad or my mom or this brother. We just think we have forever. We don't know when that last conversation will take place. As these 400 employees who entered the Murrah building that morning, that Wednesday morning, had no inkling that this, for some, might be their last day on this planet. Right.
And there's posters around that say, today's the first day of the rest of your life. Well, we also need to live like today, maybe the last day of the rest of your life.
And would we live differently?
And so why are you waiting? So that was really powerful every time we would talk about the book. And then, also there were many. Okay, I don't come from a theological background that's very engaged with spiritual sightings or angelic sightings or that kind of thing.
Okay.
But on April 19th, I mean, even that isn't my common occurrence, and it isn't many people's common occurrence. It appeared to be a common occurrence this day. Two different individuals, two women, one driving away from the city and one driving to the city, wasn't looking for this, but what they saw was I don't even know what the right word is, not a swarm, not a herd. They just saw incredible concentration of angels above Oklahoma City. And somebody who came to Oklahoma City to minister to the city is Johnny Erickson Tata. You're probably familiar with her, quadriplegic.
I have all of her books.
Has a heart of compassion.
Oh, yes.
She was here, and when I interviewed her at the radio station, she said so simply, Robin, do you realize that Oklahoma City is probably the most empowered spiritual place geographically in the world right now? And so why wouldn't there be a lot of angels here?
Right,
I didn't see them, but and not only
I think there's an Old Testament story. I should know about.
It's one of my favorite. Daniel? Are you talking about? No,
Daniel?
which one?
Well, Elijah.
Oh, sorry, wrong story.
Yes, and that God opened his eyes and he saw the host of angels.
I love that story. His servants, yeah.
Right.
His servant.
Right.
I love that story.
So the angels were there the whole time, but God opened their eyes to see the unseen.
And even today, I mean, you either believe what's in the Bible or you don't.
Right.
So
the Bible is a supernatural book after all.
And so anyway, there were a lot of divine sightings from adults to little children, and it's really an encouragement in it. And there is a whole other dimension of spiritual reality. And so
when you think
it was
about
manifested.
a building that had 400 people in it, and we mourn and lament everyone who died, especially the children. But of the 400 that were in the building, 168 died. That means over 200 lived. And those who were in surrounding buildings, that this had an impact throughout, that whole area. There was divine interventions in those who were spared. And we could talk about all the theology of that. Your book does go into some of that. Why were some spared? Why were others taken? And at the bottom line of it, it's a mystery in the sovereign plan of God. There are many things that God does not reveal to us in this life. But God's intervention in that more were not killed, I think, is worth noting as well. Considering the size of the bomb and the destructive nature of it and the impact of it. Many more could have been killed, and perhaps the angels hovering above had something to do with those who were spared.
Yeah, and it comes back to mystery. We just have to live in the fact that even though I'm an absolute person, I like absolutes.
Right.
There's a
we
whole
like answers,
mystery.
don't we?
Right.
But we don't get all the answers in this life, and that's where faith comes in.
Right, and it applies now too. You just in terms of, as you said, it's a different crisis, but it is a crisis now, and our focus needs to be on our sovereign God as compared to our wishy-washy, what's happening kind of thing.
Right. Well, we're both natives of Oklahoma City. We both grew up in Oklahoma City, went to high school and probably elementary school.
But you're older
here.
than me. But
I am older.
Don't tell me how many years.
I won't say.
Okay.
Considerably.
Yeah,
considerably older.
Let's not lie, but yeah.
Although a little secret is we were born on the same day and the same month.
Have the same birthday.
But many, many years apart. I must emphasize that.
Okay.
But I was not in Oklahoma City when this happened. I was pastoring in the Washington, D.C. area and have come back to Oklahoma City. But you lived through the 1995 bombing and subsequent events. It's been 25 years. Did this bombing mark the apex of our city's development? Did we just kind of go into a shell? And was development stopped at that point? Or how would you say the bombing impacted the city?
Okay, and just for people who aren't from Oklahoma City at this time would not be a destination place to go visit.
Not at all.
Let's just say
the downtown was dead. It really was.
And so a couple years prior to the bombing, some things happened that really are quite a fascinating story, but they happened from a civic leadership perspective. And so that was a couple years before the bombing, and it was the doorway into, we are now 25, 26 years later. I'm sorry, we're just pretty cool.
Yeah, we really are.
And
we're a top destination city.
Yeah.
And that's not just our
opinion.
Appraisal.
Yeah, right.
It is respected appraisal of national organizations.
Right, and but in terms of the bombing, I think it was just kind of a momentum thing. it was already started, but it was like a perfect storm of just things that merged together. And when you come together corporately as a community, there's just something, again, mysterious or magical or whatever that happens when you're together and we came together corporately, I'll tell you. And so I think it was a part of the mix. It wasn't the reason, but it was definitely a part of the momentum.
Yeah, and as I read your book, it just refreshed my memory that at that moment in time and in the weeks following, there were no Democrats, there were no Republicans, there were no Protestants or Charismatics or Catholics or Jews. They were still there, but in terms of working together, it was one.
Gosh, I wish that was more like that now.
I do.
And we can pray for that.
Right, we absolutely can.
Right.
But that was a rare moment in time when the divisions and the things that keep people apart
were dissolved.
Melted away.
Exactly.
It's like we don't have time for that. We don't have that luxury. We have to work together for the common good. And that was powerful. And you're saying that dynamic has carried over into the progress that you've seen in these last 25 years in Oklahoma City.
Absolutely. And, we're little, even though we might have not been a destination place 25 years ago, we're still a people made of pretty strong character, whether it's from a faith perspective or otherwise. And so that was a great foundation. But God used our dismal city. God used the Oklahoma City bombing. God has used several things in our community to bring us to where we are today, culturally, civic-wise, and spiritually.
I think of a verse in the Old Testament that Joseph said to his brothers after their betrayal, and it's one of my favorite verses. It's in Genesis 50, verse 20, where Joseph is addressing his trembling brothers. He's in a position of power now and could wreak vengeance upon them. But he says, as for you, you thought evil against me. He was honest. They meant something evil. They didn't want to help him. They wanted to hurt him. But he says, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. So Joseph is recognizing, first of all, the reality of evil, but that God's superintending purposes overrule, and that what they intended for evil, God in His own miraculous sovereign way intended it for good, that even brought blessing back upon them. So I think in the sovereignty of God, there was definitely evil involved. There were evil people involved, and their desire was to murder as many people as possible for whatever political reason or that they had. We don't even care to go into that. But that was definitely an act of evil madmen who wanted to kill as many as possible. But God overruled, as He did in the life of Joseph. God worked it for good. God saved people. The testimony of the gospel went forward. Many people that we don't even know about came to Christ because of what happened in Oklahoma City. Lives were transformed. The community was unified. God overruled because He is the sovereign. And although we have, as Jesus said, a thief whose intention is to steal and to kill and to destroy, He says, I am come to bring life and life more abundantly. So God has the last word, and we see through your books so clearly, God had the last word in the Oklahoma City bombing.
And He's going to have the last word with this crisis. In fact, a non-theological example of which your example is perfect, but a non-theological that helps me is how a tapestry is done. A tapestry is pretty messy on the backside.
It really is.
But somehow the creator, the artist, knows how to make a beautiful picture on the other side. And even in the mess, there's purpose. And so something that simple, and also then something as complex as God's sovereignty, those two things can coexist.
And I think the faith that enables us to look at the backside of a tapestry and say, this is a mess, this is chaos. Whoever created this, they're demented. How could there be anything beautiful to that? But by faith, you realize that there is a designer, a creator. And I think another thing that faith generates is patience. Now, you wrote your book about 6 months after it happened, when things were still fresh. God didn't stop working in October of 1995 when your book was published. I'm sure you could write a subsequent book even larger about the wonderful tapestry of God's blessing and design that have happened in the last 25 years. That might be a great sequel for you. But it takes patience to see the unfolding of that. I mean, on April 19th, all people saw was the back of that tapestry, just a mess. You know.
And not only patience, it takes hope. And hope, not that just some ethereal hope, but hope that is practical. You know, hope that is corporate and individual. So patience, but I mean, even more so
how do you have
hope.
patience without hope? Right. So your book, to me, is as timely as the day it was written in a broader spectrum, because the principles, I mean, you talk about the character of God, you talk about the nature of evil, you talk about how God brings good things out of bad things. Aren't those themes that we need today?
Yes.
Because I'm reading statistics, suicides are up, alcoholism is up, people are in despair. People who don't know God are in despair. So they need the gospel, they need a message of hope, and they need the message of the Oklahoma City bombing.
And it's interesting because right now we're in an extraordinary season. But even in the ordinary seasons, of which we hope can't come any too soon.
Yes, absolutely.
But now is extraordinary, and that is where God shines.
Right, absolutely. But yes, we need to be following Christ in the ordinary seasons of time, because those prepare us for those extraordinary times as well.
Right.
And that's seen in your book. The people who were following God, the people who were committed to Christ, they became the shepherds. You know, they became the leaders at that moment in time because they were prepared. The people who weren't prepared, it was different for them. It might have been a life-transforming thing, but they were caught flat-footed with this. Whereas the chaplains, you talk about chaplains who showed up and immediately went to work, you know, assisting in the first responders, comforting the grieving and the families. They were ready. They were prepared because they've been following Christ routinely. And that's obviously what we need to be doing as well. Not waiting for the big tragedies to take place before we get serious about our walk with God. Because we don't know, do we? When that April 19th, 1995 experience will come to our lives individually or collectively.
Right. And just to have the eyes, the sight of Elijah's servant.
Right.
That's what, and even if we don't visually see something, to have the internal vision of that.
To know that the angels of God are hovering about us and sheltering us and sparing us from who knows what. The devil and his crowd. You know.
His crowd.
His
peeps.
And it's a big crowd.
It is.
It's a big crowd. But to know that we have the angels of God without, the Spirit of God within, we can live in confidence.
Yes.
You know, we don't
Amen.
Amen. I think that's a great note to close on, Robin.
Well,
so I appreciate your coming today. I just want to remind our listeners that Where Was God at 9:02 a.m. is still available on Amazon. I was on there the other day. They are still available. And let me encourage you, if you need a lift and encouragement, a memorial, to pick up that book on Amazon and read it. And I think it will be a blessing to you. Well, Robin, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, we thank you for tuning in to today's program. I would invite you to see us next time. And until then, this is David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.